Ladies and gentlemen, in a moment we will start a discussion panel which is titled Battlefields Between the Sacred and a Tourist Attraction. Let me invite the participants of this discussion panel to the stage, who are Mrs. Eileen Atterdijk from Pearl Harbor, United States, CEO of the Pacific Historic Parks, institution caring for Pearl Harbor battlefield. The second person will be Mr. Adam Koperkiewicz from Gdańsk, Poland, retired director of the Historical Museum of Gdańsk, today an advisor of the World War II Museum's director. Take your places, please. The third person will be Mr. Marek Syrny from Banska Bystrica, historian in the Museum of the Slovak National Uprising. And the last but not least will be Mr. Uğurçeng Deniz İmamoğlu, historian representing the Turkish Historical Society. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be talking about the balance. We'll be talking about the balance between a battlefield as a monument of history, a place somehow or very much sacred because of the wounds and blood of thousands of people, and a tourist attraction, which it should be if we want to make it be visited by the people. But before we get directly to the tourist issues, I would like to ask you first, what is your opinion about the battlefield? Should we, as it was already written in our program, should a battlefield remain as it is, or should we recreate the historical tissue? In other words, should we have the battlefields as we inherited from the past, or should we recreate buildings, structures which were there when the battle took place? Mrs. Eileen, what is your opinion? What is your practice in Pearl Harbor?
I think the recreation of a park or a battlefield is important as long as it's done historically accurately. I think if we do justice to history as we recreate it, it does bring a lot more meaning, and it brings a lot more education and understanding of what happened in the past. So we all have a responsibility of making sure that it's historically accurate. It is my belief.
Mm-hmm. And are you making investments recreating structures which were there? Were they somehow torn down after the events of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor?
At World War II Valor in the Pacific, there are a number of buildings that are historically preserved. Mm-hmm. They have not been restored yet, but they are a subject of conversation every year as to whether or not they should be. If they are, ensuring that historically accurate renovations are done. So we do have that same challenge. For us, the biggest challenge also is financial. It takes a lot of money to do that. And so that's one of the challenges that we face.
Mr. Koperkiewicz, you've been the director of Historical Museum of Gdańsk for many years, so many times you had to answer the question, should a monument remain as we have it now, or should we recreate, rebuild it? What do you think about the battlefields? Should they be recreated in their historical forms, or should they be left as we inherited them from the past?
It is always a very difficult question, because if we are looking for Westerplatte, for instance, then we have something between sacrum and profanum, and typical battlefield, but we have a battlefield with remains where the people were fighting and they died, they were wounded. Then we must remember about the troubles, disaster, and unhappiness of a human. Then it's interesting what to do. And I changed for a little the place, and we are very close to famous another building from our Second World War history, the building of a Polish post office. And we can see that the building is standing without fence. And during the fight in 1st of September 1939, the fence was very important because it was difficult to attack the building by the Germans because the distance was between the fence and the building. It was difficult to drop the grenades, to use the fire weapon for the building and so on. But after the war, the defense disappeared. And now it's very difficult to understand how was problem during the attack, how was the feeling of defenders and how was the feeling of people who attacked, and how was the war situation. And it's difficult to understand the point of attack without the defense, because we have not the same situation in like 39. And another problem is because when the people, tourists, look for the older pictures, they looked for the building and for the defense. And now they have only the building. And maybe some of them cannot find the building and recognize that they are looking for the same monument. The same is with Westerplatte, I think, that we have a battlefield, but without typical installation, without typical fortification. And it's difficult to be like a tourist inside of a battlefield and understand the fight, understand the situation during the 39. And in my opinion, it's absolutely very important in the first to make everything for tourists and for everybody to read the battle, to use investment, to use reconstruction, but only to change for a much clearer situation from 39 and to read this, not only situation, but to read the battle, how the battle was going on. Without the typical things, it's absolutely difficult because we have a very flat territory, we have a very flat place without fortification. Then it's absolutely for me like a historian, but maybe for a tourist and for the guests, it's find the climate of a battle, find the problems of defenses. It's, in my opinion, is difficult. It's absolutely important to make everything, to make clear the situation for 39.
Mr. Cyrny, your museum cares for many battlefields in the area of Banska Bystrica. Do you have the same problem? Do you have a problem of recreating structures in the battlefields, and how do you solve them?
I don't know if I can say that we are maybe in the better situation or worse situation than you in Western Platte, because the Slovak national uprising was spread in the beginning of the uprising on the 20,000 kilometer square. So there was a lot of battlefields on the widespread territory. So nowadays, until now, there is some structures in the terrain, but we cannot rebuild or revitalize something like in Western Platte, where is a lot of structures on the one place. Anyway, because we cannot do this, the Museum of Slovak National Uprising was built. There's an exposition, but we stood with the problems how to face with how to commemorate or remember to the people the historical events as it was in original. So of course the stable exposition is not such emotional as you know, the historical reconstruction or the historical buildings. We solve it in the way that we try to not just to get people to our exposition, but to bring our expositions to the people. Mm-hmm. So it means that we prepared mobile exposition. We revitalized the armed train, which fought during the uprising. Some wagons has, you know, it's built as it was in historic era. Some wagons are used for exposition. So we were through this train. We were traveled by 10th of cities in Slovakia or in Czechs too. So we can bring a part of our exhibition to the people in other countries, in other parts, who normally could not come to the Banska Bystrica and cities.
So, Mr. Imamoğlu, what is the Turkish point of view and the Turkish practice, based on an example of Gallipoli battlefield?
First of all, your question, whether the historical monuments should stay as they are or they should be reconstructed, it's an important question, and there is a key inside. How it is today. Mm-hmm. It means if it is heavily damaged or if it is totally lost, of course it should be reconstructed and renewed. But if it is, it should be the cooperation of past and today. That means it should be the cooperation of history scientists with their own information, and the science of restorators with their own information. So they should be based on the historic or the original. So a totally new artifact shouldn't come out after this event. In Gallipoli today, almost 200 monuments. Of course, some of them are built later to commemorate, but the other ones are the original places that the action, the combat was lived. They were not touched, they were not changed. Only when it needed, they could be reconstructed, renewed, according to historical truths. Mm-hmm.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but is your common opinion that to make a battlefield a legible place, a place where people coming to it can understand the situation of the both fighting sides, it needs to be, to some extent, recreated, that we are not supposed to take the battlefield as it is, we must do something to make it at least similar to the state it was during the conflict. Am I right? Is that the conclusion of your answers? Mrs. Atterdijk?
I think you tell a better story of what really happened on that day or in those days if you have historically accurate artifacts, whether it's buildings and areas. I think it helps tell the story. When you don't have that, I think you're at a disadvantage. And I think that's the difference. It's not that you can't tell the story. I just think it's much more difficult to do so. It's harder to get people to understand what truly happened when they have to imagine a lot of it. If we were all sitting here and challenged to imagine one item, and we're all told, imagine a bowl, each one of us would imagine a different bowl. But when you have something that's tangible in front of you and you're telling a story, they can attach themselves to what they see. And I think that helps people understand. I think that helps the story and the way the story is processed and told. So I think it's beneficial.
So it leads us to a conclusion that we do it for someone. We do it for the people who would come. And my second question would be kind of provocative, because I would like to ask you, why do people come to battlefields? Mr. Koperkiewicz? Why do people come to battlefields? What draws people's attention to places like battlefields? There are many other places, many interesting objects, monuments. Why do people come to battlefields?
In my opinion, because they heard something about the struggles, and that is kind of a dramatic story. People would like to dig in something important, something great, something dramatic, and to looking for some emotion and so on, so on. But in another way, the people would like to know something, to catch the knowledge much more large than from the books and from the family, because in every Polish family everybody could hear something about the Westerplatte, and it's very interesting to recognize, to compare, to looking for the imagine, looking for knowledge with something which is original, and to find our own impressions, our own opinion without another people's opinion. Mm-hmm. Another way, I think, it's something which is always in the man mentality. However we can look for a peace, and however we are looking for a present level of our international culture, the people got something looking for a war, from conflicts, and for the weapon especially. Many people collected weapon, and maybe it's some reason when they are looking battlefields.
Mr. Cerny, do you, in your museum, do you research the reasons for people to come to visit your museum and the battlefields you're taking care of?
It's a difficult question. I'm not sure if we planned this research, but I think that visiting the museum, visiting the places of national memory is important, the same for the individuals as the important for the nation. So if individual, in one person knows that in his life are some events important, some events which turned his life, they are teaching about it in school on the national history. Mm-hmm. They know that this was important for the national history. This was important for the ancestors, for the grandmother, grandfather, for the former family. So I think they realized that this is important for me too, because it some way orientated or influenced my today's life.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Mamolo, what draws attention of visitors in Gallipoli?
In Gallipoli, for Turkish citizens, it could be the awakening of the nation-building process and national census, because you know, in the earlier times of 20th century, Turkish nationalism started to grow, and Gallipoli could be counted as the starting point of this nation-building process, because the Turks were being defeated for several centuries until the Gallipoli. After the Gallipoli, it was a remarkable time for Turkish historiography. It could be thought that we started resistance and then we started our national struggles in 1920s. So it's for nation building and nation census process. But also today, when a Turkish person or when a Britain, Australian, French, I mean the citizens of the fighting states could visit there for sense of belonging or finding national heroes in their histories. But when it comes to visit another battlefield, for example, when I visited Westerplatte yesterday as a Turk, and Westerplatte, there is no relations with Turkish history and Westerplatte. Now we cannot talk about nation building, national census, national belonging, etc. This is just a cultural and intellectual activity. So I'd like to see, anyone like to see when go for intellectual goals, intellectual aims, they look forward to be informed very well what is the event, what is this place, what happened here, this kind of things.
Mm-hmm. So intellectual reasons, family reasons, patriotic reasons. And did you ever happen to meet the so-called dark tourism? So traveling to places marked with tragedy, with blood, with death. Did you ever happen to meet someone whose motivation was like that, Mrs. Sloterdijk?
No, I don't think I have. It's not to say that people haven't come with that motivation in mind. I think we prefer to look at the brighter side. We prefer to see people in the light of coming with respect, coming for remembrance and valor, not necessarily for more darker motivations, but it is possible.
Mm-hmm. Gentlemen, did you ever meet someone who travels to places marked with blood and death? The so-called dark tourists or grim tourists? Never?
I don't know.
It's nice to hear because it is, as far as I know, it is a growing area of tourist business and the motivation of following the places marked with tragedy is something which is, for me, it is hard to understand, but I can imagine that there are people who are looking for the places like that, and I think in some scope the battlefields would be a natural target for this kind of tourism. So this leads us to another question. Battlefields are not only places, historical places where battles took place. Usually, especially in the areas, those battlefields like the ones represented by you, quite modern battlefields, right? Those battlefields are usually also cemeteries. So, in your opinion, should the tourist business allowed into a battlefield, or should it remain in the environment, in the outskirts of the actual battlefield? Mrs. Sloterdijk?
I think there's a place for it. Tourism, if and used as may not be the correct word, but when you apply the business aspects of tourism to a battlefield, some of the advantages that it brings to the table is it opens the door to who would visit your park. You may not have the opportunity of being able to share your message with a number of people without the mechanism of tourism. So I think tourism can be used in a positive light. I do also believe, however, if not checked properly, it can be used as a negative light. So it's a matter of balance to me. Being able to utilize it to further the mission of the park and the battlefield, I think there is a place for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mr. Kaperkiewicz, what's your opinion? Should the tourist infrastructure be built on the battlefields, or should it remain in the outskirts?
It depends from a guide, because it depends from the guides. Because if we have an excellent leader who is providing tourists in the right direction, in the right way of history.
Just a second, we will have to fix your microphone. Mogę prosić kogoś o poprawienie mikrofonu, pana dyrektora Koperkiewicza? So before your microphone is fixed, let me ask the same question, Mr. Cyrne, the same question. How do you think about that, letting the tourist infrastructure on the battlefield?
I think we need to find some middle way. We want to get people to these places. Anyway, we want to preserve these historical places for the future. For example, we have a little big problem by our exterior exposition by the museum. There are some vehicles, some tanks, some cannons. We cannot stop people, tourists, to go there, to touch them, and on the other side, our custodians, our conservators said it's not good to allow people to get on these structures. Anyway, in this time, we didn't solve, we didn't take any solution which allow to people to come or to teach to be with these objects, and on the other side don't damage these objects of history, this object of memory. I'm not sure if it's the way when something is in the showcase, or some objects like tanks, like cannons, are out of people. They cannot move to them. They cannot go up to this. We temporarily allow, for example, we temporarily allow people go into the arms trade, which we revitalized. It's not open whole year, but where is the anniversary of Slovak national uprising, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, we allow people to go inside, and of course it's very old. We have to take care about it. We are afraid that people damage something, but anyway, I think it's good to get people possibility to feel this subject, this history, by touching, by feeling this.
So I think we can come back to Mr. Koperkiewicz. So what is your opinion about the business, tourist business on the battlefields?
Sorry for this microphone. In my opinion, it's absolutely important to prepare the group of tourists before they went to a monument, because it's absolutely important to have a very few knowledge. Of course, the more knowledge is much better, but if somebody is visiting the battlefield without any knowledge and the relationship and the contact with this place, it's only typical short touch. And in my opinion, it's necessary to prepare. Then it depends from organizer of a tourist. If somebody is treating very seriously, then the program for visiting monument, visiting the battlefields is good done. But if it's only a business for money, then it's better to remove around the battlefield without reflection, without the idea. I think we are now in Poland before 2 kinds of business of tourists. One is correct, one is according to our wishes, but another one is only for money, then I am against.
So it brings us to another question. Should we, as institutions caring or responsible for the battlefields, run the tourist business ourselves, or should we let it to a free market? Mr. Mamolu, what is your opinion?
I think I also, if possible, would like to give a brief information about previous questions. When we talk about Gallipoli, before the tourists, there are inhabitants living inside the historic site. Almost 10,000 people are living inside, because the war took place in a populated area. It was not far from the populated area. Actually, there should be a life in the historic site, both from the inhabitants. Also, it's valid for tourists too, because to show the past as it is could be impossible without letting them inside. However, on the other hand, protection, the rules, setting the rules, and maintenance and control should be serious, of course. When we come the other question, I think the museums should do it themselves, because when it comes to another trade company, firm, etc., maybe the interest will work. But if the museum does it and controls itself, the cultural aims will prevail.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of tourist attractions would you accept or allow on the battlefield? Because tourists don't only need to see, to touch, sometimes they need to experience more, to buy something as a souvenir. What kind of such stuff would you allow in Banská Bystrica and all the battlefields you take care of?
On the battlefields out of Banská Bystrica, out of city, out of museum and the territory of museum, these battlefields are in the widespread territory, widespread terrain. So we cannot stop people to go there, but there is any business or any touristic activities because there is during the whole year any occasion to be there. Maybe if there is some reconstruction historical, there are kiosks, there are the markets and stuff like this, but it's only temporary. It's nothing stable, so after the action everything goes away. So this is not problem. During the celebration of the Slovak national uprising in Banská Bystrica, which is held every August 29, there is in the territory of the museum about 10,000 visitors. Of course, it's a lot of people who want something to buy and stuff like this. So we have to regulate the amount of this kiosk, of these free market subjects. Anyway, as I said before, this is everything only temporary buildings, temporary activities. So after 2 or 3 days, the whole place is empty or is prepared for the next service, as we use it during the year. Sometimes maybe there is a problem when we need to find another way how to get money, because there is not enough money from the state support. So probably we borrow our places, our territory for some business activities which are has big distance to our uprising. But again, it's temporary actions. Borrow for the activities with amusement, where is the day of the city and stuff like this. So for us, in our case, it's not such a big problem because all of these activities connecting with the free trade is only temporary, only for the short time, for a few days.
Mrs. Anderdijk, your Pacific historical parks are very permanent, quite contrary to Museum of the Slovak National Uprising. How do you solve the issue of supervising the things which are sold, for example? How do you select the tourist attractions in your area? Having in mind that the Pearl Harbor battlefield is still also a big burial place of those sailors who died there.
I think for us, our focus on anything that we would sell in our museum store has to be as historically accurate as possible. It has to have interpretive value to the park itself. We don't really focus anything on anything outside of that. So we wouldn't allow other types of merchandise to be sold in our store. As we work with the National Park Service, you know, who runs the parks, I think there's a level of respect that we need to show each other, that we respect the property, we respect the grounds, and respect the fact that it is a memorial. So when you walk that line, you have to ensure that in all aspects of your business, that you continue to do that, to provide that respect. So applying that to what merchandise we would sell in our store, we go through a pretty robust process of selecting literature, selecting magnets, and anything else. To us, there's value in those types of merchandise if a visitor could purchase it, take it home, and be able to continue the process of interpretation and understanding and remembering what they saw at the park and what they learned. So there is value to that. But it is a fine line, and you have to very diligently walk it. You have to always keep your mind on, is this the right product? Is it sending the right message? Does it convey what we are trying to convey at the park? And so it's a process that you go through, at least for us, every time we look at new merchandise.
So once again, we come to a conclusion that we, as responsible for battlefields, should supervise the tourist business in the area of the battlefield. Mr. Koperkiewicz, I know you have a kind of strict opinion about the way, for example, the way the things should be accessible as far as souvenirs on Westerplatte. We talked about it some time ago. Would you share it with us?
It's possible, of course, but it depends on a kind of program, kind of a reconstruction group, because I know, for instance, that the castle in Lublin was a place of a lot murdered Polish people by the Germans. That it's absolutely impossible to organize a happy reconstruction of the history and so on and so on. And in another way, I remember in Gdańsk reconstruction groups which presenting a text for General SS Kuchera, which was in Warsaw. And the reconstruction group was traveling by Poland and presenting a text of General Kuchera in another towns of Poland. It's a little crazy. But of course, if everything is going to show the knowledge about the history, about the equipment of soldiers and the uniform of soldiers, then it's good for our lecture, good for our learning young people, because the time from Second World War is long, and the knowledge about the uniforms, about the soldiers, it's going less and less. Maybe it's an interesting way of doing to present something.
You mentioned reaching young people with the program of our education on the battlefields. How should we reach them? How you do it in Banska Bystrica? How you do it? What do you think about the very modern and very popular interactivity or computer games? Should they be allowed or somehow presented in the battlefields?
About this interactive technique, interactive interpretation, I'm not sure if the way of games like military battles is good way, because I'm not sure if children can knows what is good, what is bad, because you know the adult people knows that killing is bad, that the victims and stuff like this, but I'm not sure if children can copy this in our way. Anyway, of course, we live in the modern era, so we need to hold step with these techniques. We use it for the creating imaging, for example, the interior of the tanks, of the insurgents tanks, of how it looks in the interior of the armored train. In the case we didn't want to allow children or other visitors to go to the real train. This is the 3D dimension projects, but I think it's not a good way to base the exposition too many to this technical or too modern technical systems. We had exposition from 2004, and there was a lot of PCs, a lot of displays, and I think it's not such emotional. Is it, for example, in the Warsaw Pricing Museum, when you can touch the things over there, not only to see it on the displays.
Mm-hmm. And what is the Turkish point of view on the computer technology and interactivity when it comes to the battlefields?
As I told in my presentation, within Gallipoli Historic Site, there is an animation center with 8,000 kilometers square closed area. There are virtual tours and 360 degrees animations, VR activities. Of course, we cannot resist to change and technology to modern, but I also think we should not completely adopt them. On the other hand, we should maintain our traditional styles, like this guide, a detailed guide. Each of the visitors should be given like this, maybe different sizes, different details. Also the guides on the area, the writings about the monuments, they should not be left. Both of them should go together, I think.
Mrs. Satterdijk, in your opinion, should we just talk about the history in the battlefields like yours, or should we bring any message connected with that history? So should we simply tell this history, or should we teach something more the visitors, especially the younger ones?
I think we have a responsibility to teach the history. I think that's a given for all of us. That at a minimum needs to happen. Is it to say that we should take another step and perhaps teach leadership, teach the opportunity to see how people made decisions and whether children or adults would make the same decisions? I think there's an opportunity there. You have to, at least in my opinion, be a little cautious that you're not pushing opinions on others or encouraging a message that is not potentially being derived. I think there's a fine line there. But I believe there is an opportunity if done correctly.
Mr. Kaperkiewicz, what's your opinion? Should we give a message or just teach the history in the battlefield?
Oh, it's depends from the group which we have in front of our presentation, of course. If we have a young, then the message is another. If we have old people, another. But it depends from quality of mentality too. But absolutely, it's important to do something correct and something deep, because now the guests and the tourists would like to know more and more interesting. The message must be very responsible and depend from time, because now we are talking that sometimes if we are telling too much about the world, then we are presenting the value and goodness of a war. And of course we are presenting the war look like and how is the result of the war. And it depends from the interlocutor.
And you, Mr. Cerny, what is your opinion about the message and the simple, plain history?
I think and I hope that our main goal is not just to bring some historic fact or to get some money from the visitors or from the tourists, but I hope that our main goal should be or must be to bring some message to the people. We are not commemorating, we are not telling about these events, about the battlefields, because there was some history, some events, some fights, some lot of victims, lot of died people. We are telling this story because we need to people say what was the sense, what is good, what is bad, and what we need to get for the day life, for the. I think, like in case of Westerplatte, in case of any other battlefields, I know that it's important place for Polish history and for world history, but I think that the final result, what I think should be when somebody came into Westerplatte and go away from Westerplatte is. I know that this was in this way historically, and there is some moral message. Why it happens. It was of course something bad, something wrong, and what should I do, or what can I do to not repeat this? In our exposition is one citate. To forget to these died people means to let them die again. So I think we should to bring people something like this, to know what was the sense of this fight, of this battlefield, of this history, and what can bring it to my life, how it can influence my opinion, my thinking.
So should Gallipoli be just a history lesson or a lesson of attitudes, a lesson of values?
According to me, if we want to give a message in historic battlefields, there is a risk that the message that we want to give can change during time, during eras also there could be misunderstandings. So I think what we should do is to put historical truths sufficiently and effectively, so it will give the message itself. I think this.
And let the visitors draw the message, to any further message by themselves.
Yeah, they should.
So my final question to our foreign visitors, to our foreign guests. You've seen Westerplatte. You've been there. You probably learned a lot about our perspective of Westerplatte. Do you have any idea you could share with us as far as Westerplatte, as its future shape? Do you have any recipe for us, Mrs. Aderdijk?
Recipe. I think it is a very big opportunity for you. I think the story that you can tell and the history should be remembered. And I think it's very important to remember it. Embarking on creating a park that does that is difficult and very challenging, but I think maybe a necessity for your history. So I would encourage it. I would strategize as to what your goals are, what your mission is, what is it that you really want to accomplish as you go down this path. And I would look forward to seeing the outcome of where you get to.
Hopefully soon. Mr. Cerny, what is your recipe for us after visiting Westerplatte?
I cannot give you any recipe because fortunately we don't need to face with the problems than you, because I know that there will be difficult struggle for the who vision is better. Is it vision of preserving or save the historical place, or to enlarge the port, which is important for the city. Anyway, I think that there is a possibility to find some way good for society, for nation history, nation memory, and the world memory, of course, and some successful or acceptable solution for the next industrial development of the city. You know, it's hard to say, but I need to say it. If you couldn't save all the territory, should be good to save the most you can. So if you will need to empty some part of the Westerplatte for the port, it could be good if it will be the places or the part which is not so necessary for the national or history memory.
Any other suggestions, Mr. Imamoglu? Did you find anything which would be a direction for us? Did you see anything which would be quite simple? Will you share it with us, please?
Rather than theoretical advice, maybe I would like to give a practical advice. As far as I understand from my yesterday visiting, people could enter the area at any part, and they leave the area at any part of the battlefield. I think there should be compulsory routes. Each people should enter from the same place. They should pass the compulsory points, must points, and they should leave from the same place. And also while walking around, there should be more informative writings, points, desks, etc.
Okay, thank you very much. Now it's time to hear the questions from the audience. Is there anyone who would like to ask any question? Tak, proszę mówić po polsku, mamy tłumaczenie.
Mam interesuje pytanie do pani z Muzeum w Pearl Harbor. Bardzo ciekawi mnie, jak wyglądało współdziałanie przekazu dotyczącego zdradzieckiego zaatakowania Ameryki w 1941 roku i czy w momencie, kiedy Ameryka została zaatakowana w 2001 roku w Nowym Jorku i w Waszyngtonie, chodzi o World Trade Center, czy w jakimś stopniu muzeum przyłączyło się do wówczas takiego zjednoczenia patriotycznego Amerykanów po tym, bo pojawiały się kiedy porównania zdradziecki atak na Pearl Harbor w 1941 i akurat była rocznica zresztą okrągła i w 2001 roku też atak zewnętrzny na Nowy Jork, który spowodował też zjednoczenie społeczeństwa amerykańskiego. Pytam, czy była jakaś interakcja pomiędzy Pearl Harbor Memorial a wówczas tą falą patriotycznej jedności?
I forgot you don't have the translation, so let me summarize what Mr. Semka asked you. The question was when the World Trade Center was attacked in 2001, the situation seemed kind of similar to what happened in Pearl Harbor in 1941. So was there any activity taken up by your memorial in the field of uniting the American society because of that similarity?
At the park itself, we respected what had happened. I think we honored it. We did not have any activities that were specifically in memorial of it. However, on that day, we did for a number of years with the National Park Service show respect to what had happened and to those who have died. But other than that, no, we do not. I think part of the concept of what we were trying to respect was the victims of September 11th had their own way of memorializing what happened, and we, as a park, honored that and respected their way of doing it. So we chose to follow what that is and then just show respect.
Does it answer your question, Mr. Semka? Anyone else would like to ask a question?
I would like to add something, if it's possible. First, I arrived in Poland, to Gdańsk. My wife, she showed me Westerplatte. I think Dardanelles in Gallipoli, in Westerplatte, it's same sense. I think the people, the soldiers, defend their motherland, fatherland. I know the Waterloo, Pearl Harbor, everything I respect, but the Dardanelles, Westerplatte, I think same mentality against the enemy, against the imperialism, I think. Just, I would like to add. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Professor?
So I have a very practical question. Maybe you can answer directly, or maybe not. It's a business issue. To Eileen, first of all, but also to a colleague from Turkey. So to what extent private donations help your institution to exist? Is there a foundation? Because we have colleague from foundation from Gettysburg. Yes, the situation in the United States is different than in former communist country, where private capital in private pocket is very limited. Okay? So as far as I know, the tax system in the United States helps to support institution of culture. and to what extent you are able to get money to run your institution. Is it an issue in Turkey, for example, a part of a normal capitalist world during our communist period? Yes, it's my question, practical, of financing, fundraising.
As it was shown in my presentation, the donations was one of the budget of Gallipoli historic site, but it's too limited because the Gallipoli historic site is directly the branch of Ministry of Culture and Tourism, and it also gets its shares from the general budget, so it did not need so much for donations. However, the issue that you mentioned could be counted as the outsourcing the national parks issue, not for Gallipoli, but there are some other historical places that some trading companies erected buildings, monuments, they help the state. It could be counted as normal. For Turkey, it's okay.
For us at Pacific Historic Parks, and the way I understand cooperating associations in the United States, we have, I guess, basically three methods of funding our organization. We do it from a retail or tourism related. We sell merchandise. We promote tours. For us, we do our VR and our audio tour. We don't charge admission because we are a memorial. We have the ability to write grants, which basically is a form of requesting funds for a specific project. And we would write grants to foundations and other entities who are willing to fund that. Thirdly, we do have the ability to fundraise from a donation perspective. From my experience, that is an important aspect of financing an organization. It makes a difference. To me, fundraising is necessary because it does more than just bring money to the table in order to run your park. It brings the opportunity for us to talk to donors and promote our park, promote the history of what we're trying to perpetuate. And so that opportunity is just as important as bringing in the money. So I see fundraising and requesting or asking for donations as kind of twofold. And it has two opportunities, and they're both very important.
Of course.
Because I would like Adam Koperkiewicz to share with us his knowledge and experience he gathered during his stay in American museums on eastern coast. You told me about your experience from former decades. In what way in some American museums people are making research who can give or support money for the museum. Can you share with us information about this?
You are thinking about the bank activity of the museum. Yes, some of the big museums in the United States use money from people, great people, who collect money not in the bank, but collect money in the museum. And the museum is making bank operation, and later on they spend money to the people. And the point is why the people would like to use museum, not the banks. Because in the gray opinion of people, bank could collapse. The National Museum in the United States, never.
So, ladies and gentlemen, any more questions? If not, thank you for taking part in this discussion. One more question, please.
Ja jeszcze do pani dyrektor Muzeum z Pearl Harbor z prośbą o uzupełnienie pytania o kwestie finansowe. Wydaje mi się, że wysokość dotacji państwowych na dane muzeum pokazuje rangę, jaką państwo przykłada do danej placówki. W związku z tym pytanie jest takie, czy mogłaby pani mniej więcej określić rząd wielkości, jakim budżetem rocznym z dotacji państwowych dysponuje Muzeum Pearl Harbor i też chciałbym wiedzieć, jaka część jest z dotacji prywatnych. To jest o tyle ciekawe, że Stany Zjednoczone są potężnym państwem, w związku z tym ciekawi mnie, jak poważnie finansowo traktują pani placówkę.
So the question is that first it was said that the amount of money the government spends on a particular museum reflects its position in the whole memory or cultural system of the country. So the question is what, maybe not an exact amount, but what kind of money is spent by your government on your institution, and what percentage comes from the government and what percentage from private sources? Because the United States is a big country, so it is very interesting how much money is spent on the enterprise like yours. No, it doesn't have to be the direct numbers. Just to give us a picture of the funds.
The National Park Service is funded by the U.S. government. They are a government entity, and so they do have a budget, and they are allotted so many dollars for each of their parks. I do not know what their exact process of determining which park gets how much money, but I do know that Valor in the Pacific does get over $3 million. Is that enough money to run the park? No. As the number of visitors increase, the wear and tear on the park increases. There are other fundraising requirements that need to be fulfilled with respect to programs and mission-based activities. And so it's very difficult to fund all of that. And so I think that is where we, as a cooperating association, comes to the table. How much we spend depends on the year. Depends on the activity, depends on the needs of the park. So in some years we could spend $1 million, and some years we could spend up to $5 or $6 million. It just depends on what are the activities of the park for that year, what we'd like to accomplish, and however long it takes us to fundraise for that to achieve that goal. And so it just differs.
Thank you very much. So we are already behind the schedule, so once again, thank you very much for being a part of this discussion. Dziękuję bardzo Państwu za uwagę i to już jest koniec tego punktu naszego dzisiejszego programu. To jest również koniec dzisiejszego programu konferencji. Zapraszamy Państwa na jutro.